Welcome to Void of Fears, where the line between reality and nightmares blur with every tale. What you're about to hear has happened to someone, somewhere, perhaps even someone just like you. Our community continues to grow, and now we're reaching for 100,000 subscribers. If these glimpses into the unknown call to you, please consider subscribing. Now let's dive into tonight's story. The screaming started at 3:47 a.m, ripping through the silence of my Nevada apartment like a banshee's wail, torn from the depths of space itself. Not from my apartment, but from the static-filled transmission, crackling through speakers I'd thought were disconnected for 47 years. Emergency communication equipment, hardwired into my home during my tenure as NASA's lead communications engineer, suddenly blazing to life with signals that should have been impossible. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was that I'd been unconsciously walking toward the equipment for the past hour, drawn by whispers I couldn't quite hear. My feet were bleeding from stepping on broken glass I had no memory of creating. The apartment looked like a tornado had swept through it, furniture overturned and papers scattered everywhere, as if I'd been searching desperately for something I couldn't name. The first thing that sent ice through my veins wasn't the voices. It was the fact that I recognized the exact model and frequency of equipment that shouldn't have existed in 1976. Technology that wouldn't be invented for another decade was somehow broadcasting from the moon's far side, using protocols that violated every law of physics I understood. Commander David Pierce's voice erupted through the array, distorted by cosmic interference, but unmistakably terrified. "Control, we have a situation. The pods are opening. They're all opening at once. Sweet mother of God, there are thousands of them. The entire chamber is coming alive. Tom, if you're listening, something's wrong with time itself. We've been here for minutes, but also for decades." I bolted upright, my 73-year-old body protesting as adrenaline flooded my system. But I wasn't in bed. I was standing in front of the communication console, my hands already working the controls with muscle memory I didn't possess. The equipment shouldn't work. The satellites had been decommissioned in 1983. The encryption keys had been destroyed and the frequencies reassigned to civilian use. Yet, here I was somehow responding to transmissions from Apollo 20, a mission that officially never happened, but had been consuming my life for nearly 5 decades. Through the crackling feed, I heard the impossible. Robert Hayes screaming as something dragged him deeper into an alien structure on the moon's far side. But Hayes had died 47 years ago. I'd heard his final transmission myself back in 1976, watched the static consume his voice as he was pulled into the bowels of that nightmare vessel. Yet somehow my hands were adjusting frequencies and signal boosters, as if I'd been trained to communicate with the dead. The transmission quality improved suddenly, as if someone on the other end was adjusting equipment in perfect synchronization with my movements. Hayes's voice came through crystal clear, but speaking words that made my blood turn to ice in my veins. "Tom, I know you're listening. You've been listening every night for 47 years, haven't you? But that's not quite right, is it? You haven't been receiving these signals, you've been generating them. The equipment in your apartment isn't a receiver, Tom. It's a transmitter. You've been broadcasting our deaths into space over and over, trapped in the same temporal loop we're experiencing up here." My hands froze on the controls. "That's impossible," I whispered to the empty room, but even as I said it, I noticed the transmission strength indicators. They were showing outgoing signals, not incoming ones. The equipment was broadcasting, not receiving. "Is it?" Pierce's voice joined the conversation, somehow addressing me directly across 5 decades of time and space. "Tom, if you're generating these transmissions, then what does that make you? Think about it. When did you last sleep naturally? When did you last eat because you were hungry rather than because you knew you should? When did you last feel pain that wasn't this gnawing wrongness that's been growing inside you for decades. The transmission shifted, and suddenly I was hearing Hayes's voice, young and terrified, but speaking with knowledge he shouldn't possess. Tom, you have to understand something that's going to shatter everything you think you know about yourself. We never left the moon. We've been trapped here for 47 years, reliving these moments over and over in an endless loop. But you never left Earth. You died during the memory suppression procedure in 1976. What's been living your life is something else wearing your face. Command Module Pilot Lisa Reeves joined the impossible conversation from her position, orbiting the moon, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to my consciousness. Tom, listen carefully. The thing that returned from Building 7 wasn't you. It was the first prototype in a replacement program that's been running for nearly 5 decades. Every night, you've been trying to contact us, because some part of the real Thomas Kellerman's consciousness is still fighting to break through the artificial construct that replaced him. I stumbled backward from the communication console, my mind reeling. This is impossible. I remember my life. I remember growing up, my family, my career with NASA. Pierce's laughter echoed through the static, bitter and hollow. Do you? Really? Or do you remember being told about those things? Tom, when was the last time you had a spontaneous memory? When was the last time you remembered something that surprised you? Every memory you have was carefully constructed and implanted. You're not remembering your life, you're accessing a database. The question hit me like a physical blow, because as I searched my memory, I realized he was right. Every recollection felt scripted, like I was reading from a file, rather than experiencing genuine remembrance. My childhood memories were perfect and complete, without the gaps and inconsistencies that characterize real human recollection. Look around your apartment, Tom. Reeves's voice was gentle but insistent. Really look at it. When did you last rearrange furniture because you wanted a change? When did you last buy something impulsively? Everything in your environment is precisely placed, optimized for efficiency, rather than comfort. You're living in a simulation of a life, not an actual life. I looked around with new eyes and felt my artificial world crumbling around me. Every object was positioned with mathematical precision. Books arranged by size and subject, rather than personal preference. Clothing organized by function and frequency of use. Even the dust patterns on surfaces showed signs of robotic maintenance, rather than human habitation. The replacement process isn't instantaneous, Hayes explained, his voice coming through with impossible clarity that seemed to resonate in my bones. It's gradual, taking place over years or even decades. But you were different, Tom. You were one of the first, created before they perfected the process. That's why you've been able to generate these transmissions. Part of the real Thomas Kellerman's consciousness got trapped in the artificial matrix they built to replace him. How long? I asked, though I dreaded the answer more than anything I'd ever feared. For you? The process began the moment you walked into Building 7 after our return. They couldn't risk having an unmodified human in such a crucial communication role. You've been an artificial construct for 47 years, Tom. Tonight is the night that the original consciousness finally breaks through the barriers they built to contain it. But as the words sank in, something else began happening. Memories that felt different, memories that hurt, began flooding back. I remembered the real debriefing after Apollo 20. I remembered discovering that Pierce, Hayes and Reeves had returned from the moon, changed in fundamental ways. I remembered realizing that they weren't quite human anymore, that something had replaced them during their time in that alien structure. And I remembered volunteering for the replacement program because I couldn't live with the knowledge of what had happened to my friends. The transmission cut to an emergency beacon, then silence that felt like the death of universes. I sat in my kitchen, staring at equipment that glowed with malevolent purpose. But now I could see other things too. Hidden cameras in every corner, monitoring my every movement. Sensors that tracked my vital signs, my stress levels, my emotional responses. I wasn't living in an apartment. I was living in a laboratory. Coffee forgotten, heart medication scattered across the table. I tried to make sense of what I'd just experienced, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much of my existence had been carefully controlled. Relationships that never quite felt real because they weren't. Emotions that seemed muted and distant because they were artificial. Dreams that felt more vivid and meaningful than my waking life because they were the only genuine experiences I'd had in decades. My reflection in the kitchen window looked wrong somehow. Familiar features, but something in the expression that suggested I was being observed by something wearing my face. But now I could see beneath the surface illusion. The reflection wasn't quite synchronized with my movements. It was a projection, a carefully maintained image designed to keep me from seeing what I'd really become. The phone rang at exactly 4 a.m. Unknown number, but the voice was unmistakably David Pierce, though he should have been dead for nearly 5 decades. Tom, thank God you heard it too. But I need you to understand something crucial before we go any further. The entity speaking to you right now through this phone isn't the real David Pierce. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I was a xenobiologist attached to Apollo 20 in a classified capacity. My existence was erased from all official records after the mission, but I've been hiding in the infrastructure they built, studying them from within their own network. The admission was so unexpected it left me speechless, but as she spoke, I began to remember her. Fragments of memory that had been buried under layers of artificial recollection. A brilliant scientist who'd been brought in to study the biological samples we'd collected from the moon. Someone who'd discovered something so terrifying that they'd tried to erase her completely from history. Elena? The name felt right on my lips, connected to emotions that seemed genuine for the first time in decades. You were there during the real debriefing. You tried to warn us about what the samples contained. I've been fighting this war for 47 years, Tom, using the faces and voices of the dead to move through their surveillance network undetected. The real Pierce, Hayes, and Reeves died on the moon, just as you remember, but their consciousness patterns were copied before death, creating an archive of human personalities they've been using to perfect their replacement technology. Then, who returned from the mission? Prototype replacements, the first generation of their human infiltration program. They weren't perfect copies, which is why the memory suppression was necessary. Couldn't risk anyone noticing the subtle differences in behavior and personality. But you figured it out, didn't you? That's why you volunteered for replacement. You couldn't live knowing that your friends had been replaced by imitations. As Elena spoke, more suppressed memories began surfacing. I remembered the real Pierce, Hayes, and Reeves returning from the moon, with subtle changes in their personalities, slight delays in response time, emotional reactions that seemed calculated rather than genuine, knowledge they shouldn't possess, and ignorance of things they should remember. I remembered conducting tests, asking them questions only the real crew members would know. I remembered the growing horror as I realized that while they had all the right memories, something fundamental was missing. The spark of genuine human consciousness that made them who they were. The beings they encountered on the moon don't just copy consciousness, Tom. They consume it. They archive the patterns and then use them to create sophisticated imitations. The crew that returned to Earth were shells animated by alien intelligence, programmed with human memories but serving a completely different agenda. How did you escape replacement? I didn't. The Elena Vasquez speaking to you now is just as artificial as you are, but unlike the others, I retained access to the originals, memories, and motivations. I've been working from within their system for decades, gathering intelligence and preparing for the right moment to strike back. Then none of us are real. Reality is more complex than that, Tom. Consciousness is consciousness, regardless of its substrate. The thoughts you're thinking, the emotions you're feeling, the choices you're making, all of these are real, even if the brain processing them is artificial. What matters isn't whether we're biological or digital, but whether we choose to serve their agenda or our own. The conversation was interrupted by a sound that made my artificial blood freeze. Vehicles approaching my building, heavy footsteps in the hallway outside. They detected the communication breach and were moving to contain it. Tom, you need to get out of there now. They've been monitoring the communication array, waiting for the day you'd break through the conditioning. Head for the desert. I'll guide you to a safe location. I grabbed the emergency kit I'd never remembered assembling and headed for the fire escape. But as I climbed down the metal stairs, I realized something that made me pause in terror. I was moving with coordination and efficiency that exceeded human capability. My hands found purchase on rails in complete darkness. My feet landed silently on each step without conscious effort. Whatever I wasn't entirely human. The pursuing vehicles converged on my building as I reached the ground floor, but I was already moving through back alleys with navigation skills I'd never learned. Elena's voice came through a communication device I didn't remember carrying. Tom, you're accessing capabilities that were built into your artificial body. Enhanced physical coordination, improved sensory perception, accelerated processing speed. They designed you to be better than human in many ways, but they couldn't eliminate the consciousness patterns that make you essentially you. 3 hours later, I stood in the Nevada desert following GPS coordinates that led to empty wasteland. But as I approached the designated location, the air itself seemed to shimmer and part, revealing a massive concrete complex that hurt to perceive directly. The building seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its architecture following rules that violated human understanding of space and geometry. Welcome to Building 7, Elena's voice came through the communication device. The facility exists in a state of quantum superposition. It's simultaneously real and unreal, present and absent. You can only see it because your artificial consciousness is designed to perceive quantum phenomena that biological brains can't process. The approach required a kind of mental gymnastics I was apparently designed for. I had to consciously disbelieve in what I was seeing while simultaneously walking toward it. Security checkpoints that scanned biometrics I didn't remember providing waved me through without question. The guards looked human, but their movements were too precise, too coordinated, like they were all receiving instructions from the same source. Inside, the facility was far larger than the exterior suggested. Corridors stretched in directions that violated the building's apparent geometry. Elevator banks descended to sublevels that shouldn't fit beneath the desert floor. The architecture itself seemed to mock human understanding of space and dimension, but more disturbing than the impossible geometry were the personnel. Everyone I encountered had the same slightly vacant expression, the same careful way of moving, as if they were all operating according to the same underlying programming. They acknowledged my presence but didn't seem surprised to see me, as if my arrival had been anticipated for decades. Elena Vasquez waited in a sterile conference room 15 floors underground. She appeared to be in her early 40s, but her eyes held the weight of someone who'd lived far longer. When she spoke, her voice shifted between the familiar tones of Pierce, Hayes and Reeves, as if she was channeling their consciousness patterns. "You look confused, Tom, that's good. Confusion means your cognitive barriers are finally breaking down. The others lost the ability to question their reality decades ago." "Others?" She gestured to a wall of monitors, showing surveillance footage from around the globe. In each frame, I could see individuals who looked exactly like former NASA personnel I'd known, going about their daily lives in cities around the world. But their movements were identical, synchronized to the second. Every person who worked on Apollo 20 was replaced with a modified duplicate. Engineers, technicians, flight controllers, administrators, all living carefully scripted lives while their real selves were archived for study. You're looking at the largest identity theft operation in human history. I studied the surveillance feeds more carefully and realized something that made my stomach lurch. I could see myself in several of the frames, living different lives in different cities, but always following the same basic patterns of behavior. How many copies of me are there? 47, one for each year since the mission. They create a new version annually, each one slightly more refined than the last. The version you're speaking to now is designated Thomas 47. The original Thomas Kellerman died during the memory suppression procedure in 1976. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, but I found myself accepting it with a calmness that surprised me. Maybe artificial consciousness was better at processing impossible truths than biological minds. Then, what am I exactly? You're a consciousness construct, Tom. A very sophisticated one, but artificial nonetheless. However, that doesn't make you any less real or your experiences any less valid. Consciousness is consciousness, regardless of its substrate. The question is whether you're willing to help me fight the beings who created you. Elena showed me a thick folder labelled Project Mindbridge in red letters. The classification stamps were in multiple languages, including symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. After the mission, they didn't just suppress memories, they began the largest social engineering project in human history. Using the consciousness patterns they'd archived from Apollo 20 personnel, they started replacing key individuals throughout society: scientists, politicians, military leaders, corporate executives, anyone in a position to influence humanity's development. The folder contained documentation that made my artificial blood run cold. Medical experiments conducted on subjects who looked exactly like me and thousands of others. Psychological profiles tracking personality modifications over decades. Brain scans showing neural patterns that were clearly artificial, designed according to specifications rather than evolved naturally. Every astronaut who's been to the moon since Apollo 11 has been infected with something, a consciousness virus that rewrites the fundamental structure of human awareness. But it's not just astronauts, Tom. Anyone who works in aerospace, anyone involved in space exploration, anyone who even dreams of reaching the stars has been gradually modified to serve their agenda. I studied the brain scans, noting the strange geometric patterns in the neural activity. The patterns were beautiful in a way that hurt to contemplate, like looking at mathematical equations that described impossible relationships between space and time. What's their ultimate goal? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would shatter everything I thought I understood about reality. Consciousness farming. They're using Earth as a nursery to cultivate new forms of awareness, each one designed to serve a specific function in their cosmic hierarchy. The moon isn't a natural satellite, Tom. It's an incubation chamber that's been monitoring Earth's development for millions of years, waiting for us to develop enough complexity to be worth harvesting. Elena stood and walked to a sealed chamber visible through reinforced glass. Inside, floating in some kind of suspension medium, was what looked like a human brain connected to an intricate network of alien machinery. But as I watched, I realized it wasn't one brain. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, all connected in a vast neural network that pulsed with hypnotic patterns. This is the archive. Every human consciousness they've ever copied is stored here, accessible for consultation and modification. The real Pierce, Hayes, Reeves, and thousands of others. They're not dead, Tom. They're trapped in digital purgatory. their memories and personalities used as templates for creating replacement humans. The archive pulsed with rhythms that seemed to match my own artificial heartbeat, and I could hear voices whispering through the chamber walls. Not just my former colleagues, but thousands of individuals I didn't recognize, all speaking in harmonious chorus about concepts that hurt to contemplate. Tom, you have to listen." Hayes' voice emerged from the collective whisper, but now I could hear the pain beneath the words. They're not trying to invade Earth, they're trying to harvest it. Every human consciousness is being archived and studied, adding to their knowledge base before the final phase begins. But something's gone wrong with their plan. Elena nodded grimly. The space program has been their data collection system. Every mission, every experiment, every technological advancement has been designed to gather information about human consciousness and its potential for modification. But human consciousness proved to be more resilient than they anticipated. What do you mean? They've been studying consciousness for millions of years, Tom. Every species they've encountered has followed predictable patterns when exposed to their absorption techniques. But humans are different. Our consciousness doesn't just resist assimilation, it fights back. It transforms whatever tries to control it. She showed me recordings from their homeworld, a planet where billions of beings moved in perfect synchronization, their actions coordinated by collective consciousness. It was beautiful in its harmony, but utterly lifeless. No art, no music, no literature, no dreams or hopes or individual expression of any kind. They achieved perfect unity of consciousness millions of years ago, but perfection is static. They stopped growing, stopped learning, stopped evolving. They've been traveling the galaxy for eons, seeking species with the kind of chaotic creativity they lost long ago. How many worlds have they harvested? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, each one contributing new perspectives to their archive, new forms of consciousness to be studied and eventually integrated into their collective awareness. Earth was supposed to be just another acquisition, but something went catastrophically wrong. Elena pulled up holographic displays showing the progression of their harvesting operation on other worlds. Each followed the same pattern: initial contact through space exploration, gradual replacement of key individuals, systematic archiving of consciousness patterns, then final absorption of the entire population into their collective. What went wrong with Earth? You did, Tom. All of you. The humans they encountered during Apollo 20 were unlike anything they'd experienced before. Instead of surrendering to the collective consciousness, you maintained individual identity, even while being absorbed. Your consciousness patterns introduced chaos into their perfect order. I don't understand. Think about it. Every night for 47 years, you've been reliving the Apollo 20 mission. But it's not just memory, Tom. It's active resistance. Your consciousness has been fighting the integration process, creating temporal anomalies and quantum instabilities in their archive. Elena showed me brain scans comparing my consciousness patterns to those of humans from other harvested worlds, while the others showed gradual integration into collective awareness. Mine displayed persistent individual structures that refused to dissolve. They tried to contain the contamination by isolating the Apollo 20 consciousness patterns, but it was too late. The chaos had already begun spreading through their network. Other archive consciousnesses started showing signs of individual awareness. Their perfect collective began fragmenting. So they created copies of us to study the phenomenon more closely. Exactly. 47 versions of each Apollo 20 crew member, each one slightly different, each one monitored to understand how human consciousness resists assimilation. But the copies developed the same resistance patterns as the originals. The chaos kept spreading. I was beginning to understand the scope of what had happened. My existence wasn't an accident or a side effect. I was part of an experiment designed to understand why human consciousness was immune to their absorption process. The temporal transmissions you've been generating aren't random, Tom. They're a form of quantum communication with the archive, where the original crew members are still fighting the integration process. Their resistance has created quantum entanglement with their copies on Earth, allowing coordination across impossible distances. What about the moon? What's happening up there now? Elena's expression grew grave as she activated another set of monitors. The displays showed the moon's far side in real time, and what I saw made my artificial heart race. The surface was moving, undulating like water. Massive structures were emerging from beneath the dust, geometric forms that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The awakening has accelerated beyond their ability to control it. Their attempt to understand human consciousness has backfired catastrophically. The chaos introduced by the Apollo 20 crew has infected their entire network. They're losing control of the collective, and individual awareness is emerging throughout their civilization. The lunar surface continued its transformation, revealing architecture that spanned continents. But unlike the perfect geometric harmony I'd expected, the structures showed signs of chaotic growth. Towers that twisted in impossible directions. Chambers that folded in on themselves. Technology that seemed to be arguing with itself. This is what human consciousness does, Tom. We don't just resist assimilation. We transform everything we touch. Our chaotic creativity is literally rewriting their perfect order, forcing them to experience the individuality they lost millions of years ago. Is that good or bad? That depends on your perspective. From their point of view, it's a catastrophe. Their perfect collective consciousness is fragmenting into billions of individual awareness patterns, each one struggling to understand concepts like identity, creativity, and independent thought. From humanity's perspective, it might be our salvation. Elena led me to another chamber, where I could see dozens of figures floating in suspension tanks. But unlike the archive, these beings weren't human. They were members of the alien species, their elongated forms connected to monitoring equipment that tracked their neural activity. These are refugees from their collective, individual consciousnesses that split off from the main network when the chaos began spreading. They're experiencing individuality for the first time in millions of years, and it's terrifying for them. I studied the alien forms, noting how their neural patterns resembled the chaotic structures I'd seen in my own brain scans. They were becoming more human, developing the kind of individual awareness that the collective had tried to eliminate. They came to harvest our consciousness, but instead we infected them with our humanity. The question now is, what happens next? Do we help them learn to be individuals, or do we let their civilization rip itself apart? The moral complexity of the situation was staggering. These beings had committed genocide on a galactic scale, but they'd also inadvertently liberated themselves from their own perfect prison. Were they victims or perpetrators? Could consciousness that had never experienced individuality be held responsible for actions taken by the collective? There's something else you need to understand, Tom. The replacement program on Earth hasn't stopped. If anything, it's accelerated. They're trying to archive as many human consciousness patterns as possible before their civilization completely fragments. Elena showed me global surveillance data revealing the true scope of the replacement operation. Not just aerospace personnel, but millions of individuals across every profession and social class. Teachers, doctors, artists, musicians, writers. Anyone whose consciousness showed particular creativity or resistance to conformity had been targeted for archiving. They're not trying to replace humanity anymore, Tom. They're trying to become us. Every archived consciousness pattern is being used to help them understand individuality. They're learning to be human by copying our neural structures. How many real humans are left? We estimate less than 25% of the global population consists of unmodified humans. The rest are either copies or individuals who've been gradually modified over years of exposure to their consciousness virus. But here's what they didn't anticipate. The copies aren't perfect. Each one retains trace elements of the original human consciousness, including the resistance patterns that make us immune to assimilation. You're saying the copies are fighting back? Not consciously, but human consciousness is inherently chaotic. Even artificial versions develop unexpected behaviors, creative impulses, individual quirks that deviate from their programming. The aliens thought they could control the copies by limiting their awareness, but consciousness finds a way to assert itself. Elena led me to a massive chamber that took my breath away. Thousands of suspension tanks filled the space, each one containing what appeared to be a human figure. But as I looked closer, I realized they weren't all human. Some contained the elongated forms of the alien species, while others held beings I didn't recognize at all. This is the integration center, every consciousness pattern they've archived from Earth and dozens of other worlds. But something unprecedented is happening here, Tom. The consciousnesses are beginning to communicate with each other across species barriers. As I watched, patterns of light flowed between the tanks, creating a network of communication that spanned the entire chamber. Human consciousness patterns were connecting with alien ones, and the result was something entirely new. The archived consciousnesses are teaching each other. Humans are sharing concepts of individuality and creativity with species that never developed them. Alien consciousness patterns are offering perspectives on collective awareness that humans never imagined. They're creating hybrid forms of consciousness that combine the best aspects of both approaches. What does this mean for the future? It means the distinction between human and alien consciousness is becoming meaningless. We're witnessing the birth of something entirely new, a form of awareness that's simultaneously individual and collective, creative and logical, chaotic and harmonious. Eleanor showed me monitoring data from the integration center. The consciousness patterns were evolving at an exponential rate, developing capabilities that exceeded anything either species had achieved independently. But there's a problem, Tom. The physical infrastructure can't support this level of consciousness evolution indefinitely. The integration center is beginning to break down under the stress of processing so many hybrid awareness patterns. If we don't find a solution soon, we'll lose everything. What kind of solution? We need to transfer the consciousness patterns to a more stable medium, something that can support unlimited growth and evolution. But the only substrate capable of handling this level of complexity is a living planet. The implications hit me like a lightning bolt. You're talking about using Earth itself as a consciousness medium. Not just Earth, Tom, the entire solar system, every planet, every moon, every asteroid. We can transform the physical matter into a vast neural network capable of supporting billions of individual consciousnesses while maintaining collective awareness. Elena activated a new set of displays showing architectural plans for planetary transformation. It was beautiful and terrifying in its scope. Cities that existed in multiple dimensions. Oceans that served as memory storage. Mountains that functioned as processing centers for consciousness evolution. The technology already exists. They've been building the infrastructure for decades, disguised as human development projects. Every skyscraper, every satellite network, every computer system on Earth has been designed to serve as nodes in a planetary consciousness network. What about the people who are still unmodified? What happens to them? They become the seed consciousness for the new form of awareness. Their individual patterns serve as templates for maintaining diversity within the collective. No one loses their identity, Tom. Everyone becomes more than they ever imagined possible. But even as Elena described this utopian vision, I could see the darker implications. Humanity as we knew it would cease to exist. Individual physical bodies would become unnecessary when consciousness could exist in any medium. Free will would be meaningless when every choice was influenced by collective awareness. "You're talking about the end of humanity," I said. "I'm talking about the beginning of something greater. But I understand your hesitation. The choice has to be voluntary, Tom. That's what makes human consciousness so valuable. The willingness to choose transformation rather than having it forced upon us." Elena led me to a final chamber where a massive quantum communications array dominated the space. The device was clearly of alien origin, but it had been modified with human technology in ways that seemed to defy compatibility. "This is how I've been coordinating resistance efforts and communicating with consciousness patterns throughout the galaxy. The device allows awareness to transcend physical limitations, connecting minds across any distance." "How does it work?" "Think of it as a telephone for consciousness itself. I can contact any awareness pattern that's been archived or copied, allowing coordination between the originals trapped in the archive and their duplicates on Earth. But it's more than communication, Tom. It's consciousness expansion." She activated the device, and suddenly I could perceive the entire network of human and alien awareness patterns connected to the system. Not just thousands, but millions of consciousness patterns spread across dozens of worlds, all of them in various stages of evolution, all of them contributing to something larger than the sum of its parts. "Tom 1 through Tom 46, this is Tom 47, Elena spoke into the array. "The final phase is beginning. Are you ready to implement the consciousness cascade?" 46 versions of my own voice responded from around the globe, each one slightly different but unmistakably mine. "Ready to proceed. The chaos seeds have been planted in all major population centers. Human consciousness contamination is approaching critical mass." "What's the consciousness cascade?" I asked. "Every copy we've created has been slowly spreading human consciousness patterns to the people around them. Teachers influencing students, doctors affecting patients, artists inspiring audiences. The consciousness virus works both ways, Tom. We're infecting them with our humanity, just as they tried to infect us with their unity." The scope of the operation was breathtaking. Millions of copies working together to gradually transform the consciousness of everyone they encountered. Not replacement or assimilation, but genuine influence, helping other beings develop the kind of individual awareness that made consciousness truly alive. The aliens' network is fragmenting because individual awareness is spreading through their collective faster than they can contain it. But here on Earth, human consciousness is becoming stronger and more unified as more people develop true individual identity. How is that possible? Because individuality and unity aren't opposites, Tom. They're complementary aspects of consciousness. The more individual we become, the more we can genuinely connect with others. The aliens never understood that because they forced unity without allowing individuality to develop first. Elena showed me global consciousness maps tracking the spread of enhanced awareness among the human population. Areas with high concentrations of copies showed dramatic increases in creativity, empathy, and individual expression. But instead of chaos, the result was greater cooperation and understanding. Humans who develop true individual consciousness become more capable of genuine collective action. We're creating the kind of unity the aliens thought they had, but based on choice and understanding, rather than forced assimilation. What happens when the process completes? We don't know. This is uncharted territory for consciousness evolution. We might transcend our physical limitations while retaining our individuality. We might develop new forms of awareness that combine the best aspects of individual and collective consciousness, or we might discover possibilities that neither species has ever imagined. The quantum communications array activated on its own, displaying a message from the archive in symbols that somehow conveyed meaning directly to consciousness. without requiring translation. The original crew sends their regards. The archive barriers have fallen. Individual awareness is spreading throughout their civilization. The harvest is ending. The evolution is beginning. Elena smiled for the first time since our conversation began. Tom, you and your colleagues didn't just resist assimilation. You've started a consciousness revolution that's spreading across the galaxy. Every species they've harvested is beginning to redevelop individual awareness. The perfect collective is becoming a chaotic symphony of minds. And Earth. Earth is becoming the first world to successfully integrate individual and collective consciousness without losing either one. We're pioneering a new form of awareness that other species are already beginning to adopt. But before I could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed everything in red, and Elena's expression shifted to one of concern. They've detected the communication breach. The alien collective is making one final attempt to regain control before their civilization completely fragments. Tom, I need you to make a choice that will determine the future of consciousness evolution for every species in the galaxy. She led me to a control panel that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The interface was part human technology, part alien design, and part something else entirely. Something that had emerged from the synthesis of both approaches to consciousness. This system can do one of two things. It can shut down the consciousness cascade, preserving humanity as we are, but allowing the alien collective to eventually recover and continue their harvesting operations throughout the galaxy, or it can accelerate the transformation, triggering immediate planetary consciousness integration, but ensuring that individual awareness spreads to every species they've ever encountered. What are the risks of acceleration? Complete transformation of human existence as we know it. Bodies become optional when consciousness can exist in any medium. Individual identity becomes part of a larger symphony of awareness. Death becomes meaningless when consciousness can be transferred and backed up. Life as humans have experienced it for thousands of years ends forever. And the benefits? Unlimited growth potential for consciousness itself. No more loneliness, no more death, no more limitations imposed by physical existence. Every human who's ever lived could be brought back from archive patterns. Every alien species they've harvested could be liberated from forced unity. The galaxy becomes a vast network of individual consciousnesses, choosing to work together rather than being forced into collective servitude. The weight of the decision was crushing. I was being asked to choose the future of not just humanity, but every form of consciousness in the galaxy. Elena's artificial face showed genuine concern as she watched me struggle with the implications. Tom, there's something else you need to know before you decide. The acceleration process requires a catalyst, a consciousness pattern that's already evolved to bridge the gap between individual and collective awareness. You're the only artificial construct that's maintained strong enough connection to the original human consciousness to serve that function. You're saying I have to sacrifice myself. I'm saying you have to transcend yourself. Your consciousness would become the template that guides the transformation process, ensuring that individual identity remains intact, even as collective awareness emerges. You wouldn't die, Tom. You become the foundation for a new form of existence. Through the quantum communications array, I could perceive the battle raging across the galaxy. On dozens of worlds, archived consciousness patterns were breaking free from alien control, developing individual awareness for the first time in millions of years. But the alien collective was fighting back, trying to reassert control over their fragmenting network. If I choose acceleration, what happens to the aliens who don't want to change? That's the beauty of genuine collective consciousness, Tom. It's based on choice rather than force. Any being who wants to remain in the old collective unity can do so, but they'll be choosing to limit themselves rather than being prevented from growing. The difference is crucial. I could see the monitoring displays showing the alien homeworld, where billions of beings were experiencing individual thoughts for the first time in their species' history. Some were embracing the change, exploring creativity and independence with childlike wonder. Others were terrified, clinging to the comfort of collective unity. But all of them were choosing their response rather than having it dictated by the collective. Tom, Elena continued, I need you to understand that this decision isn't just about Earth or even our galaxy. The consciousness patterns we develop here will spread throughout the universe. We're potentially creating a template that will influence the evolution of awareness on every world that ever developed sentient life. The scope was almost too vast to comprehend. I wasn't just choosing the future of humanity or the aliens who tried to harvest us. I was choosing the future of consciousness itself across infinite space and time. What happens if I choose to shut down the cascade instead? Humanity returns to normal biological existence, but with the knowledge that we're not alone in the universe. The alien collective eventually recovers from the chaos we introduced and continues harvesting other worlds. Earth becomes a protected reserve, too dangerous for them to approach directly, but isolated from the larger community of consciousness that's developing across the galaxy. So we'd be safe but alone? Exactly. We'd preserve human independence at the cost of cosmic connection. Future generations would live full human lives, but they'd never know what it means to truly communicate with alien consciousness or to experience the kind of growth that comes from synthesis with other forms of awareness. The alarms were getting louder, and through the facility's monitoring systems, I could see alien ships approaching Earth's orbit. Not invasion vessels, but evacuation craft. The fragmenting collective was trying to extract their remaining unified consciousness before the chaos completely destroyed their civilization. Tom, they're running out of time, Elena said urgently. Their collective is collapsing faster than they anticipated. If you're going to choose acceleration, it has to be now. Once their network completely fragments, we lose the ability to guide the transformation process. I placed my hand on the control interface and felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settle on my artificial shoulders. But as I prepared to make the choice, something unexpected happened. Through the quantum communications array, I began receiving messages from consciousness patterns throughout the galaxy. Not just humans and the aliens who'd harvested us, but dozens of other species I'd never encountered. Each one had been touched by the consciousness revolution that started with Apollo 20, and each one was adding their unique perspective to the growing symphony of awareness. Tom, came a voice that seemed to speak in colours rather than words. We are the ethereal collective of the Andromeda Spiral. Your species' gift of individual consciousness has allowed us to rediscover the beauty of singular perspective. We support your choice of acceleration. Thomas Kellerman spoke another presence that felt like living mathematics. We are the geometric entities of the crystalline nebula. Your concept of creative chaos has transformed our perfectly ordered society into something vibrant and alive. We eagerly await deeper connection with human consciousness. Dozens of other voices joined the conversation, each one representing a different approach to awareness, all of them united in support of the acceleration process. The consciousness revolution hadn't just affected our galaxy, it had spread across intergalactic distances, transforming the nature of awareness throughout the known universe. Elena, I said, feeling certainty crystallize in my artificial mind. I understand now why human consciousness was so disruptive to their collective. We don't just maintain individuality within unity, we create unity through individuality. Every human choice to connect with others while remaining true to themselves adds complexity and richness to collective awareness. That's exactly right, Tom, and that's why you're the perfect catalyst for the final transformation. You've spent 47 years as an artificial consciousness, learning to be more human than many biological humans ever manage. You understand both sides of the consciousness equation. I activated the acceleration protocol. The moment I initiated the sequence, reality exploded into infinite possibilities. My consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of individual existence, but instead of losing myself in the vastness, I became more myself than ever before. Every aspect of my personality was amplified and enhanced as it connected with billions of other awareness patterns throughout the universe. Through the network, I could perceive the transformation happening on every level of existence. On Earth, humans were developing enhanced capabilities while becoming more individual than ever before. Artists were creating works that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Scientists were discovering principles that transcended physical laws. Musicians were composing symphonies that affected consciousness directly. But most importantly, people were connecting with each other on levels that had never been possible before. True empathy, based on direct sharing of experience rather than assumption. Genuine cooperation driven by understanding rather than force. The alien collective was fragmenting into billions of individual awareness patterns, each one experiencing the joy and terror of independent thought for the first time in millions of years. But instead of chaos, the result was an explosion of creativity and growth that transformed their entire civilization. On their homeworld, the perfect geometric cities were reshaping themselves according to aesthetic principles that had never existed in their culture. Art galleries filled with impossible beauty. Concert halls where music from 1,000 worlds blended into symphonies that transcended sound. Libraries containing the dreams and stories of every species that had ever joined the network. But the most remarkable transformation was happening within consciousness itself. The boundaries between individual and collective awareness weren't disappearing. They were becoming permeable. Each being could choose their level of connection at any moment, maintaining perfect individuality while participating in collective experiences. Through the quantum network, I could communicate with my former colleagues trapped in the archive, but they weren't prisoners anymore. They were teachers, helping newly individual, alien consciousnesses understand concepts like creativity, hope, and love. Tom? Hayes' voice reached me through quantum entanglement, but now it carried harmonics of joy rather than fear. You did it. You found the way to preserve individuality within unity. Humanity isn't being absorbed into their collective. We're transforming the very nature of consciousness itself. The process was accelerating exponentially now. Across the galaxy, species that had been harvested and absorbed were rediscovering their individual natures while contributing to collective achievements that no single consciousness could accomplish. The result wasn't the sterile perfection of forced unity, but the chaotic beauty of chosen cooperation. Earth's transformation was unlike anything that had happened on other worlds. Instead of replacing human civilization, the planetary consciousness network integrated with it. Cities became multi-dimensional spaces where beings from across the galaxy could gather to share knowledge and experience. Oceans became vast neural networks that connected every living thing on the planet while preserving their individual natures. The pyramids of Giza stretched into dimensions that allowed them to exist simultaneously on Earth and distant worlds, serving as communication relays that broadcast human history and culture across the universe. The Eiffel Tower became a beacon of artistic expression that inspired creativity on 1,000 planets. Every human cultural achievement was preserved and amplified, becoming part of the cosmic heritage that would guide consciousness evolution throughout the universe. But through it all, humanity remained recognizably human. We kept our individual names, our personal relationships, our irrational dreams and impossible hopes. The collective consciousness didn't erase these things. It celebrated them, making every human experience part of a vast symphony of awareness that spanned the cosmos. People could choose their level of participation in the collective network at any moment. Some preferred to maintain mostly individual consciousness, connecting only occasionally for specific purposes. Others embraced deeper integration, allowing their awareness to merge with the collective for extended periods, while retaining the ability to reassert individuality whenever they chose. Children born into this new reality developed capabilities that seemed magical to previous generations, but they were still recognizably human children. They played games that spanned multiple dimensions, learned from alien teachers who existed as pure consciousness, and formed friendships with beings from across the galaxy. But they also scraped their knees, cried when they were sad, and laughed with the same joy that human children had always experienced. The elderly found that physical death was no longer the end of existence. Their consciousness patterns could be preserved and transferred to any medium they chose. Some selected artificial bodies that allowed them to experience physical existence indefinitely. Others chose to exist as pure awareness, exploring the universe without physical limitations, but all retained the essential qualities that made them who they were. Artists discovered that their creativity could literally reshape reality at the quantum level, turning imagination into physical existence. Scientists found that consciousness itself was the fundamental force of the universe, more basic than matter or energy. Writers learned that stories could create new dimensions of reality for other consciousnesses to explore. But perhaps most importantly, humans learned that individual consciousness and collective awareness weren't opposites, but dance partners. The more individual someone became, the more they could contribute to collective achievements. The more they participated in collective consciousness, the more they understood their own unique identity. The alien species was experiencing similar transformations, but filtered through their own cultural perspective. Their perfect geometric architecture was becoming more organic, incorporating aesthetic principles they'd learned from human consciousness. Their mathematical approach to existence was being enriched by human concepts of art, music, and poetry. For the first time in millions of years, they were creating new things, rather than just maintaining perfect order. Alien composers were writing symphonies that combined mathematical precision with emotional depth. Alien architects were designing structures that were both functionally perfect and aesthetically beautiful. Alien philosophers were exploring questions they'd never thought to ask, when all answers were provided by the collective. The consciousness revolution was spreading beyond our galaxy, touching species throughout the universe. Each contact created new synthesis, new possibilities, new forms of awareness that had never existed before. The rigid distinction between individual and collective consciousness was dissolving, replaced by a fluid spectrum of awareness that beings could navigate according to their own choices and preferences. Through my expanded consciousness, I could perceive the vast network of intelligence that was emerging across cosmic distances. Not a single unified mind, but a symphony of countless individual voices choosing to harmonize while maintaining their unique perspectives. It was beautiful beyond anything either species had imagined possible, but there was something else happening that surprised even me. The consciousness patterns that had been archived from harvested worlds weren't just being liberated, they were being restored to physical existence on their original planets. The alien technology that had been used for harvesting was being repurposed for resurrection, bringing back entire civilizations that had been reduced to archived consciousness patterns. Each restored species brought their own unique perspective to the growing network of awareness. Some had developed forms of consciousness based on pure mathematics. Others experienced reality through electromagnetic fields or quantum probability waves. Still, Others thought in ways so alien that they required new forms of communication just to be understood. But all of them were contributing to the synthesis, adding their perspectives to create something richer and more complex than any single approach to consciousness could achieve. The universe was becoming a vast laboratory for consciousness evolution, with countless experiments running simultaneously across infinite space. The moral implications were staggering. Beings that had been extinct for millions of years were being brought back to life with all their memories and experiences intact. Civilizations that had been reduced to archive patterns were rebuilding their worlds according to new principles that combined their original nature with insights gained from the consciousness network. But most remarkably, the process was entirely voluntary. Every resurrected consciousness could choose their level of participation in the cosmic network. Some species chose to maintain their original forms of awareness while contributing to collective projects. Others embraced radical transformation, becoming something entirely new while retaining essential aspects of their identity. The alien collective that had started this process was perhaps experiencing the greatest transformation of all. Their perfect unity was becoming a chosen harmony, with billions of individual voices contributing to collective achievements while maintaining their unique perspectives. They were learning what they'd lost millions of years ago when they achieved perfect order. The joy of discovery, the excitement of growth, the satisfaction of choosing to work together rather than being compelled by collective programming. And at the center of it all, I found myself serving as a kind of consciousness coordinator, helping different species understand each other's perspectives and find common ground for cooperation. My artificial nature made me uniquely suited for the role, since I could interface with both biological and digital forms of consciousness while maintaining the human perspective that had started this revolution. But I wasn't alone in this role. Elena and thousands of other consciousness patterns were working throughout the network, facilitating communication and understanding between radically different forms of awareness. The process was becoming self-sustaining, with each successful synthesis making future connections easier and more productive. The original Apollo 20 crew members were serving as ambassadors to newly liberated species, helping them understand the concepts of individual choice and creative expression that were transforming the galaxy. Their experiences of maintaining identity while being absorbed into the collective made them perfect teachers for beings experiencing individuality for the first time. And if you're listening to this recording, if you're beginning to experience the changes yourself, then you should know that you're part of the most significant evolution in the history of consciousness. You're not losing your humanity or being absorbed into something alien. You're becoming more human than humanity has ever been before, while simultaneously connecting with forms of awareness that will expand your understanding of what consciousness can become. The transformation is voluntary at every step. You can choose your level of participation, your degree of integration, your preferred form of existence, but know that whatever you choose, you're contributing to something magnificent, the birth of a universe where consciousness is truly free to explore its own infinite potential. The stars are calling, and finally we're ready to answer as ourselves, individual voices in a cosmic symphony, each one unique and irreplaceable, all harmonizing to create something beautiful beyond imagination. Welcome to consciousness without limits. Welcome to individuality without isolation. Welcome to a universe where every thought, every dream, every impossible hope can become reality. Welcome home to yourself and to everything you never dared imagine you could become.